Hello, and welcome to the Making the Nelda K. Balch Theater White Model video. The purpose of this video is going to be to show you, the student, how to put together a white model or a shell of the Nelda K. Balch Theater. We will be following similar steps to our cereal box stairs project, and of course the first thing we'll do, just like we did for that project, is make a checklist. I will be fast forwarding and slowing down certain portions of the video during the model making process so that you can see the steps, some steps more clearly as we move along the way. Let's get started. So if you remember, the first thing we should do is make a checklist. Checklist complete, we now need our Go Juice. And Go Juice complete, I decided since this is a long project, I'm going to need some Go Candy. Collecting my help, I'm ready to get started. So the first thing I'll do is prepare my work surface, and I'm using the kitchen table again here. The next thing, of course, is we need to assemble our tools. Make sure you have everything together before you get started, and then organize your work surface so that it's much easier to do your work as you go along. Using the ground plan that I sent you in the mail, we're going to tape the ground plan to the foam core, but first notice that I'm going to center my ground plan on my foam core before I make any transfer marks onto it. I spent about 3 minutes doing this particular part of the project, and I spend about 3 minutes every time being careful to put my paper perfectly aligned on my foam core. This will save you time later in the project because then all of the layers that you cut out should line up and match perfectly and evenly. I'm going to tape my ground plan down once it's all set up so that it doesn't shift or move, and all of my lines again will then line up when I'm done at the end of my project to glue. I'm using a number 11 X-Acto knife, which is a pointy sharp blade, to punch through my paper into the foam core below. Notice that this takes a very long time. It's a tedious process. But what we're doing is that at each interstice, each place where two lines intersect, I am going to punch a hole for both lines. So once I have punched holes for where every line ends, every point ends, I can take my paper off, and now I have all of these dots. Notice that I put my ground plan immediately above me so that I can refer to that picture image as I trace my dots, because sometimes it's not always clear when you're looking at your dots where the line should be drawn. Now you can see that there is the first layer of the Balch Theater thrust stage, the bottom layer. And now we're going to do the same thing for layer 2. Again, I spend a lot of time fussing around getting my paper set up. Notice that I just turned the foam core over, and I did that because the foam core had a slight bulge in it. I always like to have the crown side up so that later on when I glue my foam core layers together, it will help it to lie flat. Again, I'm punching holes through every single layer of the paper for the next stage. Ha! How? Seriously? Oh, et tu, Brody? Wow, this is just like teaching a real class. Well, they're not much help. Anyway, you can see that I'm now just finishing up with my second layer, and I'm ready to now connect the dots again, trace the dots with a straight edge. So now you can see that my base image here is done and my layer 2 is done. So again, I'm going to lay out layer 3. Notice again, I spend time centering my ground plan very carefully so that everything is going to line up when I'm done. I'm using my number 11 X-Acto blade to punch my little holes through my paper. And now that I've done that transfer, for my third layer, I'm ready to connect the dots. Once I have this done, and now I do, I have all 3 layers of my thrust stage done. This took me about 25 minutes. I'm now going to do the front elevation, the proscenium, and you'll need the second drawing that I sent you in the mail. It has the dimensions for the proscenium. I'm going to turn my ground plan over and draw the image of the proscenium on the back side of my ground plan. And I'm going to do this because there'll be much less that I actually have to measure. So really, I can trace a lot of the lines from my drawing on the back side of my ground plan. I will need to make sure that I know how my doorways will lay out. So if you remember from the second drawing that I sent you, the doorways are 4 feet wide and 8 feet tall. Of course, there's 2 on each side of the stage, and there's 6 inches between the doorways. So again, I'm going to align the bottom edge of my paper with my proscenium so that there's less to cut, and also I have a straight line. And having very straight lines will help us put everything together when we start gluing. So I am now punching my holes through the paper, and I have my dots on my foam core, and I'll connect the dots with a straight edge, and I have my proscenium image. This took me about 20 minutes. Now you can see here that my front proscenium wall is done, and my 3 layers of my thrust stage are done, so it's time for me to make the upstage section, the floor behind the proscenium opening. This is really just 3 rectangles of foam core, but I don't have 3 full pieces of foam core left, so I'm going to make what I'm going to call a sandwich layer for my second layer. So here's my first piece of foam core, 1 big rectangle, and I'll put that on the bottom of my upstage floor. And then there's my second rectangle, but I don't have any more big rectangles, but I have a lot of scrapped foam core left over. So I'll just take a couple of pieces of foam core and put those in my middle layer for my upstage floor foam core sandwich. You can do this for some of your other layers as well, and I've seen students do this quite a bit. It saves money on having to purchase foam core, so it's really a good idea. It didn't take me long to cut out my 3 upstage layers of floor, and you can see I'm putting things together here, and I'm getting tired. I think I should probably check on my help. And oh, are you kidding me? Oh, all right. I can see Brody is totally cashed out here. This is not going well at all. They are no help. Okay, well, I've got my floor completely done and my proscenium. Now I'm going to do these side walls. The side walls look very similar to the proscenium, except the doorways are 5 feet wide by 8 feet tall, again with 6 inches in between them. And I'm making sure that my walls are at the 22-foot height. So I'm laying out, I'm going to put my side wall here onto my ground plan so that I know where the doorways go and where the proscenium goes. And my transfer completed, I'm going to trace my shape. Again, I have to actually draw the doorway openings because that's not on the ground plan. And you have those dimensions on the second drawing that I sent you. Laying out my stage left drywall now, and marking and tracing and marking the elevation. I'll now have the 2 sides done, and I'm going to make sure that they fit. So I actually set them on my ground plan, and noticing that they fit, I'm now ready to cut them out. I save my doorway openings that I cut out, and I label them because I don't assume that they're all the same size, even though they're supposed to be. So I label them so that if I need to insert them later for some other model project, I can do that. In other words, I can have the doors be open, or I can have the doors be closed. So all my foam core is laid out, and at this point, all my foam core is cut. Check, check. So finally, thank goodness, we're ready to glue. So I clear out my work surface so that I'm ready to glue, and you can use the tacky glue for this project if you like. I will say that foam core glue is fantastic for gluing the edges of the foam core, but if you don't have that, the Aleene's tacky glue will work. You can see that my student helpers here are still toast. All right, well, let's get started. I'm not going to get any help from them. So the first thing I do is I put everything together and make sure that it fits. Now, I made a big mistake here. I put my glue on the top of my bottom layer because I've done this a few times and thought I knew what I was doing. I made a huge mistake because as I put my second layer on top, which you'll see here in just a second, I have glue where it shouldn't be. Oh, great. So I have to wipe off the glue with my hands. This is a wonderfully terrible mess, as you can imagine. You know, wasted a good 5 minutes. You want to put your glue this way on the bottom of the next layer to go on. And it takes time for the glue to dry, not a lot of time, but it's a little slippery. So you want to take a lot of time right now doing what I'm doing, which is making sure that that second layer is exactly, perfectly lined up. So I'm going to glue my top layer, my third layer. Again, I'm going to glue the base or the bottom, set it down on top, right? Very carefully make sure all my edges are even and lined up, especially that back edge, right? And that's all done. So that's great. I'm now going to put together my upstage floors. Remember, these are the rectangles. So there's my base layer, there's my little middle layer, which is my sandwich of two smaller pieces. I'll glue those down, and then I'll end it with a full piece third layer on top. Now in this area, I'm showing you saw that piece of cardboard. You'd need to connect the rectangles to the thrust shape. You can do that with a piece of tape, you can do that with a cereal box, you can do that with a piece of cardboard, but somehow you have to connect those two. I'm not going to do that because I actually have another piece of foam core of the theater that I'm going to set those upon. Alright, if you notice, I made sure that everything fits, but the back wall is crooked. It has a big bend to it. So that's a problem, and I'm going to take some T-pins that I have and poke them through the base of my floor. So I have like little spikes that that upstage wall can sit on, and I'll wait for the glue to dry. There's my T-pin spikes. So when I put my glue along the edge of that foam core, that upstage wall, I'll set it down on top of those little pins, and now my upstage wall will line up and be straight. So I've got my upstage walls done, and I'm ready to put my side walls on. You can see here's my stage right side walls. So my upstage box is done, my downstage layers are done, and here's the base that I made, so I'm going to set this on here. And again, look at it, I'm making sure that everything fits before I glue it. So I'm going to put my proscenium in, make sure it fits. It does. So I'm going to glue my base layer. I used some really old glue here, so it was a very sloppy process, but I figured it out. Okay, make sure that it, again, I'm checking to make sure that it fits. Okay, I'm going to glue the upstage now to my big piece of foam core on the base. Again, you don't have to do it this way. You can just stick these two pieces together with some tape or some glue. And now I'm ready to add my proscenium wall, which will be the last step of this process. Hey, I'm done.